All right, everybody, welcome back to the show. Thanks so much for being here with me today. I'm your host, Nolan. We got a lot to get into today. It's a major episode, a pretty heavy episode. It is October 7th, 2025, and that is, of course, 2 years now since October 7th, 2023. That was the day that Hamas terrorists launched an attack against Israel, the worst terrorist attack in Israeli history, and killed 1,200 Israelis, and it took 251 hostage. We're going to talk about that day and the significance in history of that day and the tragedy that it was. We're going to talk about the build-up to that day, which I don't think gets talked about enough. And we're also going to talk about the 2 years since and the tragedy that has transpired over those 2 years against the Palestinian civilians. So we're going to talk about all this today and more on the Quest for Clarity podcast.
Americanism, not globalism.
I am not a slave. I am a free citizen.
There should be no Federal Reserve system.
Only America first.
End all of these wars. America is trying to play empire. We want everything released, and you're actively covering it up. It's not America first to be pushing our influence in areas where it shouldn't be. We're run by people that don't understand what they're doing and don't understand the ramifications of the policies they're enacting. That's an incredibly dangerous situation. All right, everybody, before we begin, if you wouldn't mind going right down below this video and hitting like and subscribe, I'd really appreciate that. Also, if you go to my Instagram, X, and Spotify accounts and following all those pages over there, I'd really appreciate that as well. It helps me out a lot. But let's get right into the news of the day. Let's get into the episode. It's October 7th, 2025, which is, of course, 2 years since October 7th, 2023. That was the day that Hamas terrorists launched basically a ground invasion into Israel and sought to slaughter anyone they saw in a horrific terrorist attack, which took the lives of about 1,200 Israelis and resulted in the taking of about 251 hostages back into the Gaza Strip. At this time, there are roughly 20 known hostages that are still alive in Hamas captivity in Gaza that right now are being negotiated to hopefully be freed by Hamas in exchange for this war to end. So that is where we are today. There's negotiations going on right now in Egypt about potentially ending the war in exchange for a hostage deal of some kind. But we'll see what happens with that. All we can do is hope for the best. Today's episode is going to be mostly based on reflecting over the last 2 years. And, of course, reflecting on October 7th. And also reflecting on what October 7th meant for Israel, for the Palestinians, for America, and for the world as a whole. And later on, we're going to get into my broader thoughts about warfare and the concept of war. And I don't think I'm the only one who, over the past 2 years, has rethought how we look at the idea of war based on the images that have come out of Gaza and how horrific it's been. But we're going to start off here, reflecting on October 7th and what the buildup was to it. So October 7th, again, was the horrific terrorist attack that was perpetrated by Hamas. And the reason we view it as horrific is because Hamas very brutally and in a horrific manner slaughtered innocent Israelis left and right, killed entire families, killed family members in front of other family members, took people hostage, ripped them out of the arms of their families. It was an all-around brutal and devastating day for Israelis and for the world, quite frankly. And I think it's particularly egregious that when we look at the build-up to this, that Hamas was put in power largely thanks to Benjamin Netanyahu. And I know I've told this story before on the podcast, but I think it's important to reiterate it because I think we forget sometimes through the propaganda just how responsible Benjamin Netanyahu is for what happened on October 7th. Of course, the only people that are responsible directly for that attack are the Hamas terrorists that pulled it off. Those are the people that get the direct responsibility for it. But there's also some responsibility on Benjamin Netanyahu's shoulders for what I'm about to tell you about. In the years in the build-up to October 7th, in pretty much the decade beforehand, Benjamin Netanyahu was using the Qataris and allowing them, through Mossad, to funnel money into Hamas, into the Gaza Strip, to fund Hamas and prop up Hamas as the governing body in the Gaza Strip. Now, you might instantly hear that and be like, why would he want to do that? That's clearly against Israel's interests, and that clearly puts Israeli civilians at risk, because what we saw on October 7th was that Hamas was capable of breaking through the Israeli border and just slaughtering 1,200 Israelis. So you might be thinking to yourself, why would Benjamin Netanyahu in his right mind prop up Hamas, these barbarians, next to Israel? Well, he did it for the most cynical reason you could possibly think of. He has said his entire career that he does not want a Palestinian state. Under any circumstances, he does not want the Palestinians to have a state, because his greater goal in his career and the goal of people around him is to create greater Israel, which is to expand Israel's borders to encompass Gaza, the West Bank, parts of Lebanon, and parts of Syria. That is what he's made clear that his goal is. He said it in his own words, and the people around him have said it in their own words. So in order to move his chances along of doing that, he decided that the best way to prevent a Palestinian state was to prop up Hamas in Gaza as the government, because he knew, since they were so radical and since they were so obviously psychopaths, that the world couldn't look at him and say, why aren't you giving these people a state? Because he could just point to Hamas and say, you really want me to give these people a state? Not only did he do it to make sure the world couldn't pressure him, but he also did it for two other reasons. He wanted to make sure that the liberals in Israel couldn't pressure him, because a lot of the liberals in Israel have wanted to make peace with the Palestinians, and he could just point to Hamas and say, you really want to make peace with these people? But he also did it to separate off the West Bank from Gaza. The Palestinian Authority is the governing body of the Palestinians in the West Bank, and Hamas is the governing authority in Gaza. And these two groups don't get along. So by propping Hamas up in Gaza and allowing the Palestinian Authority to lead the Palestinians in the West Bank, then he could prevent these two different pieces of land, the West Bank and Gaza, from uniting and creating one unified Palestinian movement. So that is why Benjamin Netanyahu wanted to prop up Hamas, and he said it in his own words. He said in a Likud party meeting in 2019 that anyone who wants to prevent a Palestinian state had to support the bolstering of Hamas and the funneling of money to Hamas. That's roughly what he said. So he said this in his own words. He made it very clear. And if you think this sounds like some crazy conspiracy, just look up Netanyahu propped up Hamas, and you'll be flooded with articles from the Times of Israel and the Washington Post and the New York Times and the Jerusalem Post that make this case completely clear. Now, that was the buildup to October 7th. Netanyahu propped up the people that would go on to slaughter 1,200 of his people. So you might be thinking, why is he possibly still in power? Well, that's because he's allowed the war to continue for so long so that they can't really hold elections in Israel. Because if they did hold elections, he would probably lose because of the betrayal of that he basically was committing treason against his own people by funding their mortal enemies. And he's also likely going to jail if he ever gets out of office, because he was, before October 7th, on trial for corruption. He was using basically government funds for personal use, and he was in a major corruption trial and was likely going to spend some major time in jail. But they never got elections because of this war. So that is what was the buildup to October 7th. And October 7th then happens. Of course, countless Israelis are slaughtered by Hamas, the people that Netanyahu propped up next door. And what transpired over the next 2 years, which is what we'll kind of move into the next section of this timeline here. What happened over the next 2 years, and what continues to be happening to this day, was the complete attempted obliteration of the Palestinians as a people. Netanyahu and the rest of his radical war cabinet decided that this was their chance to complete that greater Israel mission. And they believed that they were going to use collective punishment, which is a fundamentally anti-Western view of war. They were going to view all these Palestinians, every single one of them, man, woman, and child. They viewed them all as Amalek. That's what Benjamin Netanyahu called them. That means that they're all collectively responsible. He ordered the IDF to go kill the Amalek, which means men, women, children, and all their donkeys. That's what that means. So he views every Palestinian, whether they're an innocent child in the schoolyard or a Hamas militant, as equal. He views them all as collectively responsible for the crimes that Hamas committed. And That mindset has resulted now in the latest numbers saying that 67,000 Palestinians have been killed in the war since October 7th. And I think it's quite a bit higher than that, but we won't know the true numbers for probably years because there's so many bodies under rubble. And if you look at speaking of rubble, if you look at aerial footage of Gaza over the past 2 years, you see it's just a parking lot now. They have basically demolished, I believe it was 86, if I'm not wrong, it's somewhere in the 80s% of buildings in Gaza. Just completely indiscriminately bombing the place to death. Like, just, you see these sites. If you open X right now, you'll be bombarded, as you have been for the past 2 years, with images of children just burning alive. Because why not? You have women being shot in the head next to their children. You have kids showing up to the hospitals in Gaza, and the doctors in Gaza saying that the children showed patterns of where they're shot. One day they're all shot in the genitals. One day they're all shot in the knees. One day they're all shot in the shoulders. Basically signifying that they're being used as target practice for the IDF. So Israel has conducted this war, regardless of what they tell you, in an incredibly brutal manner. It's one of the worst modern wars we've seen in the world. And this brings me now to what I think of war really as a whole, and why I think the United States has been so egregious in the past 2 years in funding this. We have funded this alone. We've given Israel $300 billion roughly all time in its entire history. But in this conflict alone, we've given them roughly $21 billion in cash aid. We've given them much more than that in weapons, and also we've given them a lot of diplomatic cover, specifically in the United Nations. When resolutions are brought up to condemn what they're doing in Gaza, we're always one of the lone countries that refuses to condemn them. So that is what we've been doing this whole time. We've been pretty much funding the entire thing. We finance the entire onslaught and the slaughtering of these Palestinian civilians. And that very clearly is not a good look. The world views us right now as complicit in a genocide. Just last month at the United Nations, the UK, France, Portugal, Canada, Australia, all recognized a Palestinian state, all collectively saying that what has happened over the past 2 years is unacceptable. And it's crazy that we have to look to the UK and Keir Starmer to show any kind of morality in this situation, who is a disgusting person, but he's correct on this, that what's happened so far has been egregious and so indefensible. And the fact that Netanyahu has refused to end this war, with all the images that we're seeing out of Gaza, should dispel any notion that this was ever about their two main goals that they outlined at the beginning of the war, which was eliminating Hamas, which was not their main goal because they've killed anyone, whether they're Hamas or not, and also retrieving the hostages. And as I said earlier in this episode, there are still 20 hostages that we know of that are alive in Hamas captivity. So they have failed on both fronts. There is still Hamas in power in Gaza, and there are still hostages in Gaza. So what has Netanyahu succeeded at in this entire war? Because everything we look at, every factor that we can cover, they've utterly failed. But what have they been successful at? Well, they've been successful at simply killing innocent people left and right. This whole time, we've been getting reports pretty much on a daily basis of the aid sites that have been set up across Gaza. And every time they basically herd them all in like sheep to come get the aid, the Gazan civilians, that is, they come get the aid, and the IDF simply opens fire on a crowd of starving Palestinian people. This is the people we're working with here. The IDF just slaughters them en masse and then denies that they did it until, of course, the reports come out of whistleblowers from the IDF saying, yes, they were ordered to shoot into the crowd of unarmed civilians. So the whistleblowers from the IDF admitted that that was what was going on, but the IDF then has to also admit that that was what was going on, but that was just one-off incident. It's not like this is a pattern or anything, except it is a pattern, and it's happened pretty much every single aid site. So while this is all going on, And while this is all just in front of our eyes, everyone has social media and is seeing these images. It's to be expected, since all these images are circulating around, that the world has largely turned against the state of Israel. And they've turned against the state of Israel because of the way Israel is conducting this war. Now, they would tell you, and by they I mean the mass media and the propagandists, will tell you that the world is turning against Israel for anti-Semitism. It's because they don't believe that Israel and the Jews have the right to defend themselves. They think that you're being anti-Semitic by arguing against the mass killing of Palestinian children. No, that's an incredibly low IQ and dishonest way of looking at it, to put it charitably. That's an incredibly low IQ and dishonest way of looking at it. The reason that I'm against what Israel is doing in Gaza is, wait for it, the same exact reason that I'm against October 7th and I'm against 9/11. Because, controversial statement incoming, I guess, killing innocent people is wrong. See, we would look at, if we weren't in a time of war, not only would that not be controversial, but that would be a statement that should be unifying. That killing innocent people is just not okay. It's wrong. And should be viewed as murder. Because, by definition, those innocent people did nothing wrong. Because they're innocent. And it's only in times of war that you can get massive chunks of the population to just completely become tribalist and collectivist and view an entire population of 2.3 million people as collectively guilty for the crimes of a couple thousand. This is the mindset that led us into Middle East war after Middle East war and desensitized Americans to the idea of killing tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people overseas, because we view them as all collectively guilty for the crimes of a few. And that's what has led Israel to conduct the war in Gaza the way they have, because they view all the Palestinians as collectively guilty for the crimes of Hamas. Now, here are a couple of the common propaganda lines that you'll hear from Israel, from Fox News, and from the other media outlets, and from the U.S. government officials, to justify the killing of women and children and innocent men in Gaza. They say, for example, that the people of Gaza elected Hamas. So therefore, they are completely guilty and responsible for any crimes that Hamas would then go on to commit. It's a common talking point from people like Douglas Murray or Ben Shapiro or any of these Israeli shills, that if they actually knew what they were talking about and actually thought this through for a second, they'd realize what a hypocritical thing to say that is. Yes, the Palestinian people in 2006, in one election that half the population wasn't even alive for, elected Hamas. But okay, fine. We can say that Hamas was elected. Let's say it was the most free and fair election of all time. Let's say that 99% of people in Gaza voted for Hamas to be in power. Okay. Well, in 2000, the people of the United States of America voted for George W. Bush. After 9/11, George Bush had a 90% approval rating. In 2003, George W. Bush launched the war in Iraq, which would go on to kill 1 million Iraqis, causing a mass migration crisis and making Iraq into a failed state. 1 million dead Iraqis because of George W. Bush and the neocons' lies, our government's lies. So if we're following the logical conclusion here of the people who argue that the Palestinians are responsible for the crimes of Hamas, we would then be responsible for the crimes of George W. Bush and the neocons. And therefore, we're fair game. Therefore, you actually can't complain about 9/11. Because according to the Israelis and their justification about Gaza, we actually would have had it coming. Do you see how twisted that is? To say that the people in the Twin Towers had it coming and they deserved what they got is just as sick and twisted as saying that an innocent child in Gaza had it coming. The American people have elected Bill Clinton, they've elected George Bush, they elected Barack Obama, they elected Donald Trump twice in 2 separate times, and they elected Joe Biden. These people, collectively, have ruled over the death of millions of people in the Middle East. We were actually also told we're propagandized by the state and by basically the state-sponsored media that is our mainstream media, that Barack Obama, the man responsible for the destruction of Libya and Yemen and Syria, had a scandal-free presidency. The first one in history, they say. They say Barack Obama was the first president to really have a scandal-free history. Go tell that to the people in Yemen and Libya and Syria, whose countries he destroyed. And with all that being said, are you watching this video? Am I responsible for that? Am I now fair game to any Houthi terrorist that wants to come and get revenge for the crimes of Barack Obama? Are we now okay? If they come and kill us, are they okay? Is that okay? Because if you follow the logical conclusion of this, then you'd have to say yes to that, or else you're being dishonest. So either bite the bullet and say that actually you would be okay with that, or accept reality and logic and say, no, that doesn't make sense. No, I wouldn't be okay with people I know getting killed because of the crimes of Barack Obama. No, I wouldn't be okay with that. And we shouldn't be okay with that because that's what's going on in Gaza right now. People in Gaza are being slaughtered. Women and children are being slaughtered. They're saying that Hamas committed these crimes, and therefore we're justified by whatever means necessary of eradicating Hamas. And if that means killing innocent women and children, so be it. No, I don't think so. I don't think that's justified whatsoever. Another piece of propaganda, wartime propaganda, that you'll hear from people like Rudy Giuliani at the Trump rally back in Madison Square Garden. They're saying Hamas is teaching these kids in school to be radicalized, which I'm sure is true. I'm sure they say there's propaganda in the classroom that villainizes the Jews. Sure, I believe it. I'm sure that's true. Hamas aren't good guys. Got it. Okay, here's a wild story for you. In 2016, 17, and 18, Donald Trump was framed by the mainstream media, by the intelligence agencies, to have been involved with the Russians, and that the Russians basically used him to overthrow the United States government. It's a little while back. I don't know if you guys remember, but like Russiagate. Yeah, we were told that Russia had orchestrated a coup against the United States government. They had overturned democracy and used Donald Trump to do it. Okay. So, of course, that all turned out to be completely false, like most sane people knew. But they lied about Russia. And as a result, this has greatly harmed our relationship with Russia. Is Russia now allowed to, because we lied about Russia and use that as a pretext to worsen our relationship with Russia, are they now allowed to retaliate against American citizens? Here's another one for you. In 2002 and 2003, in the build-up to the Iraq War, the President of the United States, all of his men, and the mainstream media lied repeatedly that Saddam Hussein and the Iraqis had weapons of mass destruction. And that lie was then used as the pretext to launch the war in Iraq that would kill 1 million people and displace millions more. Okay, so lies from our government, would that mean that the Iraqis are now justified in coming in and killing us? Because we were propagandized by our government and millions of people in America bought the lie. Are the Iraqis now justified because we were all lied to? They propagandized us. People that grew up in that era are now in our government that still believe these lies. So are the Iraqis now justified in coming back and killing American citizens who bought into the lie? Because, they bought into the lie. No, of course not. No. They're not justified in coming to kill us because people bought the lie. And for that same reason, because kids in Gaza who don't know any better, because they buy what Hamas propagandizes them into believing, does not mean that they are responsible for the crimes of Hamas and they are not therefore able to be slaughtered in mass numbers because they buy into propaganda. No. In no world, in any of the examples that I've just laid out in this whole video, in no world could you believe any of this without being a complete hypocrite and being inconsistent on so many levels. So all of this is to say that war, and especially the war that we've seen over the past 2 years, but war in general relies so heavily on propaganda and making you see the other side as a collective that are all thinking the exact same way. Well, here's a little wake-up call, specifically about Gaza. Gaza has Muslims. It also has Christians. Gaza has men. Gaza has members of Hamas. And Gaza also has women and children that are also just trying to live their life. It's the propaganda that is drum up in the build up to a war always makes you attempts to make you see an entire country of people, an entire group of people as one monolith, as one collective. That's how they get you to buy into war and lose all your other principles in a fanatic war state. That's what the U.S. government has attempted to do with the war in Iraq, with the war in Afghanistan, with the overthrow of Gaddafi and Assad in Libya and Syria. That's what they've attempted to do this entire time. That's what Israel is doing right now in Gaza. And once you realize that none of it's true, you realize how little war is justified. And that's the state I'm in right now. Over the past 2 years, the Israelis took it so far that I'm at a point now where I will say I'm anti-war. I'm anti-war. If there is a defensive war, if there's a justified defensive war, okay, we can talk. Yes, if we're attacked on the homeland of America, then yes, we should go to war. After 9/11, yes, we should have gone after Al-Qaeda. The problem is that we never actually go after the people that do it, and pretty much all the examples in the past 20 years, including what's going on right now in Gaza, are examples of people who had pre-planned ideas going and using a tragedy and manipulating the public's emotions to get them on board with the ideas that they had for years beforehand. If we can find anything slightly good amidst all of the death and all of the destruction, it's that the world has finally woken up to this fact. The world is sick of seeing constant death and destruction in the name of what states want to do. They realize at this point, I would count myself as one of these people, we realize that a lot of these wars, almost all of the wars, are not what they say it is. It's not for the betterment of Americans or people in America. It's for the betterment of the U.S. government and the expansion of the American empire. The expansion of the American empire is against our interests, actually. Because if we expand too far, then we lose our rights at home. Because the American homeland becomes less of a priority, because now we're maintaining bases across the world. We're maintaining, basically propping up countries across the world, which we do. And when we get so entangled in all these foreign wars across the world, that's when you lose track of what actually matters, which is the fundamental individual liberties of America at home. So that is my reasoning behind being anti-war at this point. Because the reasoning behind it that we're always lied about, that have always been lied about, the reasoning behind it is never what they say it is. So everyone out there, I'm urging you, please pay attention to that. And we just saw it this year with the war in Iran. The reasoning behind it was so transparently not what they were saying. So to think that this is dead, to think that the warfare state isn't alive and well would be naive. And we need to be on top of it, because it's not going to go away unless the majority of this country finally sees it for what it is. So that's where I'll leave it off for today. Again, heartfelt condolences to every family that's affected by October 7th, and to every family that has been affected since October 7th on both sides of both Israel and Palestine. So I'll see you guys in the next episode. Please be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys soon. Have a good day.
Americanism, not globalism.
I am not a slave. I am a free citizen.
There should be no Federal Reserve system.
Only America first.